Sociologists talk about the socialization process, which is the process of acquiring the belief system, the values, the customs, the traditions, all of the elements of culture that should be eventually an integral part of you, something that is so much a part of you that you actually don't even have to think of it most of the time. For example, George Herbert Mead and the Chicago School talk about symbolic interactionism. And this is a conscious process of role-taking in which individuals know what role they have to play in society, in the family, in any situation, because they've gone through what is called primary socialization. Now, by symbols, I mean the language. I mean the specific gestures that people use within your culture. We all know that there are specific gestures that have a particular meaning in one culture and may have no meaning whatsoever in another culture. You know what this means in certain countries, right? But depending on the time that you see this in the history of the culture, it could mean something different, right? For example, in 1943 in England, what did this mean? What's this? What's the difference between this and this?
Peace.
One means victory, right? The other means like this, right? Like go to hell, right? It's okay to say that, don't worry. He's looking at the camera. Oh my God. In addition to that, if you go to Italy, for example, you can see specific gestures that you wouldn't see in Russia. For example, this is not a nice thing to say to somebody. You're not saying it, but you are saying it at the same time, right? This is also Italian. It's also an insult. It's something that's not very good. And also, this is also an insult in Italian. So gestures have very specific meanings, and you learn these gestures as symbols within your culture. Now, well, the primary agent of socialization is the family. And so during this period, between birth and the age of 18, is when you're normally at home with your family. And just about all sociologists agree that we learn our fundamental values and our belief system through the family environment, through your parents. Not only that, but sociologists talk about somebody very, very special during this period. He or she is called the significant other. Now, during the primary phase of the socialization process, 0 to 18, the person who's your significant other is your guide, okay? It's somebody who's going to be a person that you respect, you look up to them, you listen to them. They're very, very special. They're especially important because they're going to be teaching you the fundamental values, the fundamental principles, the fundamental traditions and customs of your culture. The person could be your parent, could be your mother, could be your father, could be an aunt, could be an uncle, could be a cousin, or it could even be a teacher. But it's somebody who you feel close to, somebody you really, really respect, and the person who has the strongest influence on you in terms of understanding and developing as a member, a specific member of your culture, because you're learning the customs, the traditions, the values, and the beliefs. Later on in life, what's going to happen is that during the secondary process, from 18 to however long you live, you're going to have another significant other. But this significant other is going to be somebody who is more closely associated with what we call love, the phenomenon or the experience of love. The next stage here with the ego developing, usually, well, it depends on the person. It could be the age of 3, It could be the age of 4. But it's the time in your life when you begin to realize that you can't just do anything you want, that there are limitations, there are rules and regulations, and that you have to sort of negotiate and compromise by satisfying those particular desires that you have as an animal, coming from here, because this is still very strong, but you realize you can't just do anything and everything you want. It's not a question of sio można. It's a question of satisfying your pleasures, right, while at the same time not making any problems for yourself by breaking laws or overcoming limitations in such a way that people recognize that you've maybe gone too far and you've done something really, really bad. Because at this time, and around the same time, you're going to be developing the superego. That's when you develop your conscience. In other words, you finally develop ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, right? Your values. And your values come from who? Whom? Where do you get your values from? Your primary values?
Culture? Family.
Specifically the family, yeah. So it's the family which is going to instill into you your basic code of ethics and your basic moral code as well. This is where you're going to learn your morality. And where have they learned theirs from? Their parents. We talked about religion before. Religion can be a very strong component of your moral code or your ethical code. In fact, some of you, I'm sure, probably maybe even went to special schools as a child. Maybe your parents sent you to special religious schools to maybe learn religious codes, which is, of course, the same thing as ethics and morality. So these two things kind of go together. In Freudian psychology, when we talk about these particular stages, we say that this first stage, the id, is governed by the pleasure principle. The second is by the reality principle. And the third, the superego, is the morality principle. And so the second stage here, the ego stage of development, has to do with being able to satisfy the id, but also being able to satisfy the needs of society with regard to stability and being within the limitations and boundaries of proper behavior. In other words, another way of putting this is this. The ego is kind of like the executive manager of the personality. The ego is going to realistically find ways for you to satisfy these incredible animal desires, but at the same time being a good citizen. Okay? And so that's why we say that the reality principle governs this stage of development. So you're being realistic, while at the same time also taking care of these dark needs of the id. It's particularly with regard to the libido. The libido initially, Freud initially called the libido the source of all sexual energy. Then later on in his career, in his life, he decided that he was maybe too harsh, he was too extreme. And so he came to the point of view that the libido is actually the source of the life force within you. Or if you will, the life forces. Again, these life forces are very primitive. They come from our animal origins. And they differ according to human being. Some people have very strong libidos. Some people have very weak libidos. That's why Freud would say that some people have a very, for example, a strong sex drive. Others have a very, very weak sex drive. And so with regard to the libido, you can see how it would be more difficult for a human being to go through the ego stage if they have a very, very strong libido, because they're going to have to really manage a serious compromise, because their libido is like the animal part of them is so powerful that the civilized part of you, the ego here, is going to try to satisfy all of these unbelievable energies and desires in a in an okay way, in a way in which it's acceptable. Now, here's what Freud really, really believed about the ultimate way of behaving in society and success. Behaving in society and success. The secret to success, according to Freud, when he talked about success, he didn't mean just like opening a store or something like that, or becoming something simple like a professor. He meant like, being at the top, being like a very famous singer or a very famous politician or like a billionaire in business, somebody who's like really incredibly successful. Where does all of this come from? It actually comes from Freud says it's through the process of sublimation. Sublimation is the unconscious. Of course it's unconscious. Almost everything in Freud is unconscious. Sublimation is the unconscious process of rechanneling all of these low, base, horrible desires from nature into higher behavior. So you take, for example, the desire to kill. And what you do is you become an army general or an air force general, right? In which you are engaging in the same activity that you love, but not only do you not get arrested or in trouble, you get like medals, right? You get appreciation, respect. You may even become a politician later, something like that. And so you can think about all of the other like really strong, uncivilized forms of primitive behavior that can be rechanneled so that you can use the same energy. But you're using this energy in a socially acceptable way in order to satisfy those primitive needs, but in a realistic way and in a way which you can use to make you happy.